It's Wednesday. Normally we have a guest on Tuesdays, but due to scheduling and, well, the game being last Thursday, Labor Day being Monday, had to push things back. The guy to my left or right, not sure which way it is, my right, I believe, it is Ben Stevens, the former host of Locked On Big Ten, now with Sports Grid. He's with us to talk a little Big Ten football, which he loves, also known as Big Ten Ben, and we'll talk a little Oregon, Ohio State coming up this weekend.
You are Locked On Buckeyes, your daily podcast on the Ohio State Buckeyes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Buckeye fans? Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Buckeyes, part of Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jay Stevens, also the host of the Jay Stevens Podcast. And like I mentioned about a minute ago, it's Ben Stevens from Sports Grid, former host of Locked On Big Ten. He is here with us. And before we got on air, Ben and I talked about reminiscing about the old school Stevens and Stevens show days. Now, it's not really old school in the true sense of the term, but it's still old school to us. Out of retirement, Ben, the Stevens and Stevens show is back.
It is back. It is great to be on another Stevens and Stevens podcast. When you would come on Locked On Big Ten, you would go first. STEPHENS versus STEVENS, just alphabetical order there. I hope we keep it the same way for Locked On Buckeyes. It is great to be with you, Jay. It is great to be talking Big Ten football with you once again.
Yes, it is. And Ben, it's great to know that you learned a little something in school. The PH comes before the V. Looks like one of your teachers did a phenomenal job. Big Ten Ben, we're going to roll with that name throughout the entirety of this show. The first full weekend of Big Ten football is complete, and I know your heart was happy to watch games like Penn State, Wisconsin, Oregon State, Purdue, as well as Ohio State opening up against the Minnesota Golden Gophers.
I was indeed. It was an incredible slate, really featuring some of the best in the Big Ten. That Ohio State-Minnesota game that truly got things underway on Thursday night was awesome. I think it was very upsetting to see Mohamed Ibrahim go down, and now he is out for the rest of the season. But if you're a Buckeyes fan, things to be optimistic about offensively. C.J. Stroud finding his footing in that second half, tossing those 4 touchdown passes, the explosiveness of that wide receiver group that we all expected but saw on full display in the Twin Cities. Chris Olave looks like he's taking a stroll through the park and is going out there and catching 75-yard touchdown passes. The defense is a little cause for concern as it was last year, but hopefully Kerry Combs learns from that as they gear up for a top 15 matchup against the Oregon Ducks this upcoming Saturday. Now, Jay, here's the true travesty. One of my roommates, Ryan McGlynn, will be in Columbus, boots on the ground for that game against Oregon. It's a travesty because he is going, although I'm happy for him, he is going. I am not. A little bit upsetting, but I'm sure it will be an incredible atmosphere at the Shoe on Saturday.
I believe it will be at the time of this recording. There are still tickets available. So Ben, if you got a large chunk of change in your bank account and you got money to get from where you currently are living to Columbus, go right ahead, make that trip. You might have to work on Saturday. I'm sure your boss will understand the Ohio State-Oregon game is a very big deal to you and to many fans. And you're correct, listing off some things on the offense, some things on the defense that looked good, needed some work. I mean, Buckeye fans have been saying the same thing. Defense, got to fix something. Is it Kerry Combs, his philosophy? Not sure. Ohio State played 20-plus, I think 24, 26 guys on defense. That's a lot of guys to play at one game. So there's a lot of things you can work on to improve on. But as one analyst said on TV over the weekend, you're normally going to see the largest jump in improvement from week 1 to week 2, going from Minnesota to Oregon. Not the typical start to a season like, you might get a cupcake early. But I do believe, Ben, opening up against Minnesota is a great way for Ohio State to test themselves early before playing the Oregon Ducks this weekend.
I completely agree, and I think you take some of those lumps, and that was obviously a big concern for Ohio State last year. And one of the biggest concerns, Jay, as we discussed in the 2020 season, was not so much the idea that Ohio State would be well-rested heading into the Big Ten championship game in the college football playoff Final Four. It was that they actually needed that game experience to work through some of those growing pains and improve in live game scenarios. So now they're getting that the first week of the year, or they got that, I should say, against Minnesota in Big Ten competition in a road game to start off the season. season, and certainly were tested defensively because Mo Ibrahim, before he suffered that injury about midway through the third quarter or through the second half, was really tearing them apart. And the secondary was looking a little bit exposed at times as well. But the defensive front, I still thought was very good. Of course, Haskell Garrett taking that scoop and score back to the end zone. I still think that is where you can build off of if you are Ohio State. And to see how explosive the offense truly can be in the second half, I think is a delight for Buckeyes fans. And it's something to learn from as you get ready to host a top 15 opponent who, Jay, by the way, did not have an easy week number one, as well as 19.5-point favorites against Fresno State, getting touched all the way up until the wire of that game, getting tested throughout. And really the offense for Oregon did not do anything that was inspiring. And of course, some injury concerns for the Ducks heading into Columbus this week, and top edge rusher Kayvon Thibodeaux, if he will be available and ready to go for Oregon.
Man, I watched the play. It was early on. I think it was in the first half, within the first 10 minutes of the game. And he was the top of the screen. All of a sudden, he splits the tight end and the left tackle right in between them. Literally, it seems like a half second later, he's sacking the quarterback, strip sack. I believe that was a scoop and score they had. And I'm like, Ohio State's tackles and offensive line is good. But that man, if he's healthy, even if he's at 75%, 80% of 100% full strength, that man's quick off the line, can quickly get in between guard, tackle on either side. Stroud's young. He didn't really face much early on in pressure against Minnesota. I sure hope this offensive line is up for it. If Thibodeaux is healthy, that man might be in the backfield really, really quickly.
And the thing about Kayvon Thibodeaux is the idea that a lot of draft analysts thinks he can be the first edge rusher to go number one overall, since Myles Garrett did it a couple of years ago. He has that kind of tremendous value, even in today's NFL, to be that prototypical edge rusher that can just take over and dismantle offensive game plans. So if he is healthy, if he is fully 100% effective as well, Jay, because he left in a walking boot on Saturday and did not return in the second half against Fresno State, that will be a huge key, or possibly a huge loss for the Oregon Ducks as they get ready to face off against Ohio State. And honestly, I found it refreshing out of the young Buckeyes quarterback in CJ Stroud in that post-game interview after the game on Thursday night, saying flat out, openly and transparently, I was nervous. I wasn't in the right headspace heading into this first debut, his first career start in an Ohio State uniform. But then he found his stride throughout that game, and I think you saw it in some of what he can do at the helm of that offense. And really, Jay, as we both know, it's just getting the ball to your weapons on the outside, using what you have at your disposal, and letting Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson and Miyan Williams and everybody else really do the work because they are so talented. The fact they averaged over 10 yards per play offensively against a Big Ten defense, and I've had my questions about Minnesota's defense for more than a year now, but the fact they were able to do that, only one of four teams across all of college football last weekend to average 10 or more yards per game, or per play, I should say, in a single game, and against another Power 5 defense, a Big Ten defense nonetheless, I think truly shows what the ceiling can be for this Ohio State offense.
Man, the ceiling there. Let's start with Stroud, because coming out the second half, I was texting one of my friends at halftime, mentioned this earlier in the week on the show, and I said that Ryan Day can assist Stroud to just ease into the game by simply doing one of two things or both of them. More play action passes. Now you need to set those up via the run. Did that the first drive of the second half, getting Miyan Williams three carries before the touchdown pass, play action pass to Chris Olave. Or manipulating the defense via motion. On the touchdown pass, or the touchdown pass to Olave, you had a play action fake to Miyan Williams, who had gashed him for, I think, 15 yards on a previous play, a couple of plays previously. And then you get the third or fourth string tight end, Mitchell Rossi, coming in on a motion to see what the defense is doing. All of a sudden, Olave's wide open. Now, when Olave's open, that's great. He's going to find the hole. And he has a speed, and he's so smooth to do so. But I think Ryan Day did a phenomenal job in the second half of easing and making things easier for his new starting quarterback.
And Jay, I think you bring up a great point, because as flashy and as explosive as this Ohio State offense can be under both Ryan Day's game plan and, of course, Kevin Wilson, the offensive coordinator as well, they still really want to establish the run and set up things, yes, from the spread offense, but establish that run to build off that for the play action pass. And I think that will ease things for CJ Stroud. I thought Miyan Williams looked absolutely fantastic against a porous Gophers rushing defense who finished bottom 3 in the Big Ten in 2020. But he was clearly the guy that I think needs to lead the way for the backfield for Ohio State. Master Teague is great. The young freshman they have as well can certainly play, but Miyan Williams needs to be the bell cow, in my opinion. And then you build off of that with CJ Stroud, where what are you going to do if you're a defense? If they are running the ball well against a 5-6 man box, and then you have to commit to the passing game or you commit to the running game, and then CJ Stroud can pick you apart by dotting one to Garrett Wilson, dotting one to Chris Olave, dotting one to Jackson Smith and Jigba. I mean, there are so many weapons at his disposal that I think they can really exploit a lot of defenses. And it starts with the ground game. And that's been the philosophy for Ryan Day ever since he took over as the head coach in Columbus, to make sure that they build that ground game first and then open up the downfield passing attack after that.
Ben, are you basically saying simple is good on the football field? Just simplify things and it helps your quarterback?
Jay, you know me through and through. I am Big Ten Ben. It is always in my heart and always will be. And the number one thing you learn, as any fan of the Big Ten Conference can tell you, is establish the run, and everything is built off of that, especially when you have a redshirt freshman as your quarterback who needs to get that game experience in an Ohio State uniform. So I think you rely on the ground game and let that go, and then CJ Stroud can take over for there, who also really didn't utilize his legs all that much against Minnesota, but certainly has that capability, as we have seen in his young Ohio State career as well. So I think there's a lot more wrinkles they can add to this offense. It was great to see the explosion they had against Minnesota. Again, not a great defense by any means in the Big Ten, and certainly needed to take a leap to change my mind that Minnesota has a certain ceiling in cap this year in the Big Ten Conference. But I think to get that game experience for CJ Stroud on the road in what was a raucous environment in the Twin Cities at Minnesota, now to take that back in what I'm sure will be another wonderful environment, at least a little bit more supportive of an environment on Saturday at the Shoe, it's still going to be a big opportunity for CJ. And I think as much as he had the nerves heading into this last Thursday's opener, I think he's still going to have some nerves and some butterflies stepping out in front of the home crowd for the first time in a top 15 matchup. Now, Oregon wasn't all that impressive, like we have said, but it's still a good Oregon team that's the favorite right now to win the Pac-12, despite the Pac-12 North's struggles at the moment. So it's still an upper echelon type of opponent. Ohio State is the heavy favorite, and rightfully so, in my opinion, especially at home in the Shoe, but it's still a very big atmosphere for a young quarterback to take a part of.
You mentioned the defense of Ohio State, mentioned it earlier, and how it didn't look like maybe we thought it would have or it should have. Still some of the same issues from last year. Do you think, and I know you've watched a lot of football over the past weekend, do you think you'll see a significant jump, or Buckeye fans will see a significant jump from the defense from week 1 to the defense in week number 2?
I still think they will. And here's the good thing about facing Oregon. They have a ground attack that can certainly run with Chris Verdell, and they also have Anthony Brown as a dual threat quarterback. But Anthony Brown did not look great against Fresno State. 15 of 24, 172 yards and a touchdown. Nothing that was glaringly bad, but didn't necessarily look like he was able to lead a stellar offensive attack. And I think Oregon at times kind of at the fault of Chip Kelly, if you will. There's a misnomer that the Oregon Ducks are still speed and space and as fast as it can be in the Pac-12. Actually, under Mario Cristobal, they've been more a ground and pound team that relies on a really good defense, especially that front seven, to have success. So they're not exactly the Chip Kelly fast-paced team of old. And obviously Chip hasn't been in Eugene for 5, 6, 7 years now, whatever it may be. But that's still the first thought that I think comes to a lot of people's mind is Oregon has the best athletes in the Pac-12 and is going to be fast and explosive and score a ton of points. That's not necessarily this Oregon team, and they were really set up well by the defense against Fresno State that gave them short field opportunities off of turnovers early in that first half against Fresno State, because the second half was abysmal for the Ducks, and they really just kind of hung on and did not score much in that second half, but were able to find a way to pull out that game. And again, Fresno State was a 19.5-point underdog on the road in Autzen Stadium. Oregon, squeaking out just a touchdown win. So there are some exposed flaws for the Oregon Ducks that they need to build in on. But defensively, like you mentioned, for Ohio State, I think one of the biggest things, and I think it will come down to that confidence in the secondary. And Josh Proctor is that anchor, needs to be a little bit better. But I think when you're missing Seven Banks from a season opener and some of your best corners aren't in action, that's tough to rely on in that first environment with all the excitement leading into a season opener, especially against a Big Ten opponent in Minnesota. So I think having Seven back, having a couple of those other key weapons, and obviously we saw it, like you mentioned at the top of the show, Kerry Combs wasn't necessarily enthralled with the guys that he was playing out there, couldn't find specifically what they needed. So to have your best talent out there for Ohio State defensively, obviously doesn't need to be said, but it will be a tremendous benefit. So I think once they have those people back in place and they can work through some of the growing pains that they still will need to find that improvement, yes, I think there will be a jump from week 1 to this upcoming week against Oregon. And I think they'll continuously improve, or at least need to continuously improve throughout the rest of this 2021 season.
Ben, what is a word or a phrase? I'll give you the option, one or the other. Word or a phrase to describe what you saw from the Ohio State Buckeyes defensive line.
Mayhem, phenomenal. I truly believe what Zach Harrison can do on the outside is incredible. And you have Haskell Garrett, who anchors that defense. I think they can be really, really good. One of the best fronts in the Big Ten Conference. They went up against a really good offensive line in Minnesota this past week. And at times, Tanner Morgan was able to step back there and have pressure. And I think that honestly came from the ground game, more of establishing it with Mo Ibrahim than it did just for Tanner Morgan having all day back there. But that was one of the reasons people were picking Minnesota to be a trendy underdog pick against Ohio State, was because of that congruity along that offensive line. To have guys like Daniel Falele back coming off a COVID opt-out season, who's 6'9" and 400 pounds as a left tackle, that's a good person to have protecting your blind side. So to have all 5 of those starters back for Minnesota was a huge, huge benefit for PJ Fleck and company, and Ohio State was still able to cause a little bit of havoc. And that will be what they rely on, to get that pressure with your front 4, because that will only go to help the secondary. If you only need to rush 4 or 5 guys and you can get to the quarterback, I'm not saying sacking every time, but put the quarterback under pressure, that will really help a secondary that probably needs all of those guys back there. And then I think that allows Kerry Combs to dive into a couple more blitz packages that could really change things up and make this Ohio State defense unique. But I think it's building off those basics in the front 4. That defensive line unit for the Ohio State Buckeyes is going to be a huge, huge part of that, to allow the secondary to take those lumps and to have those growing pains and get better. And then hopefully by the midway point of this season, or maybe even before that for Ohio State fans, that defense is locked in on all cylinders, and then you build from there.
We're going to end with this note here, Ben. You love Big Ten football. I watch Big Ten football all the time. You had a different style of play, 2 different games, two different feels throughout both games, from Ohio State, Minnesota to Penn State, Wisconsin. In your Big Ten heart, your love for the conference, which one was more enjoyable to watch?
Oh, that's a good question. I guess down to the very Big Ten core of myself, I find punts and missed field goals sexy for whatever reason. I guess I'm just a Big Ten guy when it comes to that. But really, I think that game in Madison was exciting, especially towards the end, although it wasn't all that flashy. But we look at Clemson and Georgia, who play a 10-3 ball game and no offensive touchdowns. And we're like, oh, this is football at its finest. I think Penn State and Wisconsin was still an exciting game that came down to the wire there in Madison. Mm-hmm. And Wisconsin had their opportunities, but all the credit in the world goes to that Penn State defense, especially that defensive front in Happy Valley, Jay, because they looked so good this past Saturday against the Wisconsin Badgers. And Wisconsin is known for establishing the ground game, utilizing their hog mollies up front. They were able to do that a little bit with some of the ground game, and Ches Belusi was able to get a little bit of space at times, but not as much as I think they wanted. And I think that hampered Graham Mertz, because he was under pressure, not able to read past his first option. And Graham's still a young quarterback, not necessarily the best at moving past his first option, a.k.a. Jake Ferguson, as we saw on Saturday. And Penn State's defense took advantage. They made plays all day long. Ellis Brooks, in the middle of that Penn State defense, is an absolute stud. He was flying around sideline to sideline, up and down the field, making play after play in coverage, in run protection, anything they needed out of Ellis Brooks, he was doing. So I was overwhelmingly impressed by Penn State's defense. I still have my questions about Sean Clifford, although It was good to see that air attack under Mike Yurcich. And for whatever reason, a veteran secondary for Wisconsin could not even keep pace with Jahan Dotson. I mean, Jay, they were 10, 12 yards behind the play. It wasn't like Sean Clifford was dropping in dimes and dialing in his throws. It's not hard to miss guys that are 10 yards past the closest Badger defender. So I still have my questions about Sean Clifford. Want to see a little bit more from the ground game for Penn State. But as you guys know, as Ohio State fans know, Mike Yurcich believes in airing the ball out as much as possible. That's not an offense designed for Sean Clifford, who's definitely more of an RPO type dual threat quarterback. But he took advantage of huge gaping holes in the secondary for the Wisconsin Badgers this past Saturday. So I think by my heart, I like the Wisconsin-Penn State game just a little bit more. However, I had Wisconsin covering a 5.5-point spread as one of my best bets of the opening weekend of Big Ten football really throughout. They did not. I also had Ohio State as my best bet on Thursday night to cover a 13.5-point spread, which they did. So maybe I go back on what I just said there and pick the Buckeyes triumph over the Minnesota Golden Gophers.
One more for you. I always got one more question. It's early. Only had, for most teams, they've only played one game. I know Illinois and Nebraska played a couple, but I know it's early, and I want to get your take now. We'll get it towards later in the season, I'm sure, back on the podcast. The entirety of the Big Ten, 13 other schools outside of Ohio State, who do you think are the top three threats in order, 3, 2, 1, for Ohio State in the Big Ten championship? Maybe Ohio State doesn't get there, be a loss to the Big Ten East or Big Ten West opponent. Who do you think 3, 2, 1 are the biggest threats to Ohio State in the Big Ten football conference?
Well, I would say starting from the bottom at number 3, I'd still go with Wisconsin. Wisconsin and Iowa will play each other on Halloween weekend, October 30th in Madison. I think that game will decide the Big Ten West. And I still think, although Wisconsin did not look great by any means against Penn State, they lost by less than a touchdown, and they will have some opportunities to make that up and impress a bunch of people in the next coming weeks when they host Michigan and they play Notre Dame at Soldier Field. If they can get wins in those games, I think people will kind of change their tune on the Wisconsin Badgers once again as a true contender for the Big Ten West. Graham Mertz will need to improve, but I'll say Wisconsin at number 3. Number 2 is the Iowa Hawkeyes. I am so impressed, Jay, by what I have seen out of Phil Parker in that defense for the Hawks. If Spencer Petras is suitable, and by suitable, I mean completing 60% of his passes, not going 13 for 27 against Indiana's defense, then this Hawkeyes team can be really good. I tweeted out on Saturday after their dismantling of IU that the Hawkeyes are a true top 10 team. Well, as of the AP poll that was released on Tuesday, Iowa is a true top 10 team that will take on number 9 Iowa State in the Cy-Hawk Trophy on Saturday. That will be absolutely incredible theater as well. And then number 1, I would have to say, just because it is in their own division with an opportunity to shake things up, it is Penn State. I still look at that game between Ohio State and Penn State, October 30th, the same day that Iowa and Wisconsin play. Obviously, huge to have it in Columbus. And although Penn State was really good against Wisconsin, and I think will be really good this year, I still don't believe they can truly contend with Ohio State when the Buckeyes are playing at their best. And even if the defense is not overwhelmingly great, if they are good, if they are suitable, I think Ohio State still probably wins that game by at least a touchdown. So Penn State is the toughest competition for Ohio State because they have the biggest chance to derail Ohio State from even getting to the Big Ten title game. I think Iowa will be there as well in the Big Ten championship game. But until somebody knocks off the Ohio State Buckeyes, Jay, I'm not going to be the man to jump in front of the train and say it is going to happen. So I still think Ohio State will be the Big Ten champions when all is said and done.
Big Ten Ben. It's been fun, enjoyable to reunite with you, have you back on the podcast. Hopefully, we'll have you back on down the road throughout some portion of the Big Ten football season. If you could very quickly, let everyone know where they can catch you on Twitter and also where they can listen to your show, also watch your show on Sports Grid.
Yeah, on Twitter, it's at Ben Scott Stevens. You can follow me there. I try to be fun. I talk a lot of college football, a lot of Big Ten football still. So don't think just because I don't host Locked On Big Ten, I'm not still Big Ten Ben. He will live on forever in my heart and never shall he perish. On top of that, I host the Morning After on Sports Grid every weekday, 9 a.m. to noon Eastern. You can catch it really across a variety of places. It is syndicated across many channels across the country, always streaming on YouTube, always streaming on sportsgrid.com, over the top channels that you can get on your TVs at any time, and on SiriusXM channel 204. So that is every weekday, Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to noon Eastern. And then Saturday, In-Game Live, where we keep up to date with In-Game Live wagering around Big Ten and college football. So it's a lot of fun, Jay, and it was great to be back with you on a Stevens and Stevens episode. All feels right in the world.
Yes, it does. Guys, you can follow me on Twitter at jsteven07. It's Wednesday, 2 more days before game day. We're going to wrap up our preparation for Ohio State's game this coming Saturday against the Oregon Ducks.